Hey everybody, this is Perch. Here's a mail from a viewer. This is not one of these controversial questions, although maybe we'll see if some people get pissy about it. It says, hey Perch, thanks for the show. Love listening to you when I'm doing the gardening or mowing the lawn. I can't think of a worse experience, by the way, than my crappy voice coming from car audio while mowing lawn and having that engine in the background. That sounds like the perfect combo of a crappy time. But I'm glad it works for you. So that's awesome. Anyway, back to Mel. Recently I read a few issues of Marvel's What the, which is a comedy comic produced back in the 80s, I think. It was the 80s, later in the 80s. And I think it may have crossed over into the early 90s, but probably not. I think it was just the 80s. Anyway, I was struck by how funny the comic was. I'm used to comics that have comedy being incredibly cringe. The jokes rarely work. They feel like somebody old and out of touch trying to make jokes, kind of like this show. Anyway, if you get to the insults before Mumbles, then he doesn't have anything to say. No, that's not true. He will always out me with insults. Anyway, why are comics that have comedy so cringe and terrible? And then okay, and the rest of this is fine. So that's fundamentally the mail. Okay, so first a bit of an explanation. If you're not familiar with What the, it's kind of hard to find, but if you can get your hands on it, it was kind of a parody comic back in the 80s, as mentioned. And for a while, I mean, it went on for a while. This was a comic that I think had, I don't know, 40 issues. I'm completely going off a very old memory here, but it had quite a few. I mean, it had a decent run. It had a longer run than most current comics do. And in the beginning, you had a decent amount of artists that were in there. I mean, I think John Byrne had several stories in there. I think Art Adams had a bit. Jim Lee was in there at one point. Michael Mignola was in there. I'm trying to think of some other. I know there's some other like big name artists that were in that What the, and they were big at the time. Well, I mean, some of the Jim Lee was just starting, but John Byrne was obviously a big deal at the time this was coming out, which gives you a sense of how Marvel used to treat even comedy, even books that today would be the lowest paid person on the street Marvel could find. But the comics were basically, they would parody Marvel and DC. They would kind of make fun of everything, and it was I wouldn't say great humor. It was funny. They did do some good bits, but they relentlessly made fun of themselves and sometimes the fans, and often like Jim Shooter got regularly beat up in that, and all the different writers and artists usually had people poking fun at them. And it wasn't. I'm not. This wasn't any kind of classic comic that survives the ages as a key read that everybody must have. But it was solid. It was at the time, if you were a comics fan, you could pick this thing up, and it was like, yeah, for lack of a better word, it was like Saturday Night Live, but funny about comics. And it was their little gags. And as the series went on, the gags got worse. I mean, it definitely they. I think it's one of those cases where, as an ongoing, it didn't have the steam to kind of go for it as long as it did. But still, it was a solid book, and yeah, I enjoyed it. I remember thinking it created a better comics experience because you got a kind of a deeper, fuller picture of comics. If you were reading this, it felt like I don't know, it felt like a backstage pass with some comedy, and you could make joke stuff, and many of the jokes you'd make in a comic shop or with friends, they'd pop up in this book. Like Wolverine's constant overuse of "I'm the best there is at what I do, and what I do isn't very nice," and kind of Chris Claremont isms and other things. It was good. But the key there is that it was self-aware that everybody needed to be made fun of, everybody, and there wasn't this cheap gag where they would not really make fun of one group and make fun of another. I mean, there's stuff in there. I was looking at it a couple months ago, some of the early issues, and I don't remember the editor, but one of the editors was Jewish, and they were making like Jewish jokes at him, and you're like, wow, it's hard to believe that today, for example, them kind of making fun of John Byrne, and then making fun of Avita Ayala and making fun of it. Like you could imagine in what the back in the day they would happily make fun of Trump people, and they would happily make fun of pronouns, and they would go for everything. It really did have that feel to it. But today that obviously isn't going to happen. So it is funny. Now, to your question, what about comics today? Yeah, the problem with comics today is they're not willing to do everything I just talked about for the last 3 minutes. And on top of that, the humor is often ultra topical. So one of the big changes, and we've interviewed some editors that have talked to this, and writers and people, particularly at Marvel, who were there during the 80s and kind of that 70s, 80s, that time period. One of the unwritten rules, although it may have been written, was make comics timeless in the sense of don't you could leverage stuff. Ronald Reagan showed up in Captain America by Grunwald, and every now and then Bush or Clinton would show up, older or younger Bush, but it was infrequent, and it was generally done in a way that it was if they were making fun of something, or they were kind of leveraging the person. It was done in a super high level way that was kind of more broad to their character. Obama showed up in a couple comics right when he was elected, and the one with Spider-Man, where the chameleon was, I think, impersonating Obama. It wasn't bad, but there was more kind of humor and comments that really you had to be there, and you had to know those moments to fully appreciate it. And then he showed up in Thunderbolts at the same time. I don't remember who wrote that one, and it was better because it was just like there was Obama, and he's like, I'm president, and I'm trying to get to the bottom of things, but you didn't get they didn't go into anything that was going to date or age the comic. Today, a lot of the humor is what somebody saw on Twitter or TikTok, weeks ago, or days ago, or as they were writing the page, and then it makes it into the comic, and so it immediately dates the comic. And then the comic goes to get the art done, and then goes to press, and actually gets into your hands 4 months, at best, from when it was made. And so the result is a lot of these jokes don't age, more than a week, and so they're dead on arrival. There's no humor to them, and so you take that and you compound it with this kind of I don't know, with in the era of what the creators were okay making fun of themselves, and they were okay taking some hits, and maybe even thought it was funny. I don't know. In today, you cannot imagine a lot of the current creators poking fun at themselves. You can't. If they control the joke, maybe, but other people doing it, and especially if it's cutting into a part of their personality, like, you could imagine if you were to do a what the where they were making fun of Tom King's writing style and Tom King himself. There's tons of jokes you could do there, but you would also imagine that Tom King would have zero sense of humor about it, and get immediately pissed off and just angry, and just yell at. He couldn't handle it. Dan Slott, Al Ewing, Donny Cates, a lot of these creators. You see it now. It's not entirely fair, because sometimes when they lose their shit on Twitter, it's because you've got like 80 people all at them. But there's just no world where they're gonna happily participate in a parody magazine that's gonna poke fun at them. The ego or the insecurity is too much of a factor. It wouldn't occur. And on top of that, there'd be way too much of a desire, because you see this in things like Saturday Night Live and other parody shows too, where the joke they'll really want to make are all those toxic troll fans on Twitter and YouTube and how stupid they are. It wouldn't be used as a way to actually have decent, parody of their own products. It would be used as a way to poke fun at the people they don't like. That's what you'd get, and that's what you get today in a lot of comics. That's why, look, I'll say it for myself. I don't know. I'm not a fan of the alt-right. Clearly, the alt-right are nutcases, people who believe that one race is superior to the other, and in some cases want to get violent about it. Those are awful people, and in many cases, if they act on those desires, need to be in jail. But I also have no desire to see, jokes about the alt right in comics showing up, constantly about how evil they are and simultaneously how inbred and stupid they are. Like I prefer just like, hey, when they commit crimes, throw them in jail. Otherwise shun. That's kind of my approach. The to see a comic book, they would want to go there. They'd want to make fun of Trump, and they'd want to make fun of all the people. And it's like, at this point, if you're making a joke about Trump, like you're covering ground that's been covered 5 billion times by now. And if you think you have a new joke, go for it. I'm all in to hear a new joke, but if it's going to be, hey, he's fat and he lies a bit and he's got orange skin and like, I mean, okay, welcome to the party. That's the problem, and that's why you see a lot of comics today. Yeah, the jokes are cringe because they're dated, they're old, and you've heard them before, like a million times. You've heard them before. That's the problem. Anyway, thank you very much for the question. Maybe you have a different opinion on all this. Let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe, of course, and thanks for listening.